Shall we start?
Yes, sir.
Great. So, good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. So, I just wanted, before starting this presentation, that I decided to uh, dedicate to business and human rights issues. I would like to first and foremost congratulate uh, Miracle and Lassane and the whole team for putting this together and giving us an opportunity to discuss, to have a conversation around critical business and human rights issues, especially in Africa. So I think in our conversation, we had many options. A few weeks ago, when you asked me to present on um, investment law in general, I told you that I think it would be better if I could be given the opportunity to talk about business and human rights more generally, because I am a little bit more familiar with these issues than broader international economic law issues. I think we do have in Africa quite a bench of experts on these issues. So my task today, and again, congratulations for all what you are doing. Congratulations for bringing together young African academics, researchers, practitioners that are interested in international economic law, but also in business and human rights issues. So my task today is quite simple. I'm going to give you a broad, I would say, overview of what is termed as business and human rights. So I have decided to, after a few introductory words, to just present very briefly the historical evolution of business and human rights, especially in Africa. Uh, Secondly, I will touch on the normative evolution of business and human rights, be it at the global level, but also at regional levels. I will turn, therefore, to the issue of the foundations of corporate uh, obligations, human rights obligations, and I will finish my presentation by looking at the African context, which probably speaks more to the topic that was presented to you for this specific activity. I've decided, however, to focus on a broader dimension of the issues because I think a general contextualization of where we are coming from is more than needed if we want to know in Africa what needs to be done. So, first, in terms of introduction, I think it's very important to, in order to understand what has now become a field of research and a field of practice, which is called business and human rights. It is very important in order to understand that field to go back to the concept of capitalism. I think we would have not been speaking about business and human rights if the dominant economic model of our times was not based on capitalism. I am not going to go deeper into things that most of you are familiar with, no doubt. But it is important to keep in mind that capitalism is a way of understanding of, or a way of envisaging the economy, the way we collectively manage our resources, the way we produce, and the way we distribute not only that production, but also the wealth that comes out of the production. So it's not only a practical reality that is uh, practiced by different actors, it has also been a theoretical and a framework, or a sort of theoretical paradigm that has been um, very much researched, very much production around the theories of capitalism exist. But it all comes back to one reality, the relationship between the state and the market forces. So, according to this way of seeing the economy, uh, market forces must be more or less free vis-a-vis the state as an actor. So you might be very much familiar with Adam Smith's understanding of the economy and the idea of invisible hands, which are the invisible hand is supposed to be leading and governing the economy without the intervention or much intervention from any other actor. So this will give rise to a number of developments, including what can be called neoliberalism in especially the turn between the 70s of the last century and the 80s. And in the 90s, especially in developing countries, so-called developing countries, one phenomenon that was testimony to this understanding of economy was the wave of privatizations that we saw in many African countries, especially. And for African countries, um, the I would say the recommendation, if not orders, to open the economies to foreign investment, which uh, can be also figuratively called a sort of Africa's scramble for foreign investment. So um, the common assumptions behind this way of understanding economy is that private actors are more efficient than public actors or than the states, that private actors are key to development, and that economic growth would only amplify when private actors lead the economy. The idea, therefore, is to limit as much as possible the role of the state, to allow some sort of free play or free regulation by market forces. So that is the assumption. In reality, however, private business activities have, yes, and we have to acknowledge that, a significant impact on our economies, positive impact in a way in the economy. Uh, Private investment can create jobs, can create growth, can create a certain dynamism in the economy. However, as it's developed, especially after the neoliberal turn, uh, this has also come with a very high cost. It has come with a very high cost in especially the developing world, where most of the time private business and multinational corporations came in our countries with, very nice, beautiful promises, but sometimes they just left or they created havoc in terms of local communities' rights, in terms of environmental rights, in terms of the deepening of equalities, in terms of the limitations or the deepenings of inequalities and a very unequal repartition or distribution of the wealth. So let's not make mistakes. Business and human rights issues did not start in our continent with only the neoliberal turn and the post Cold War realities, economic realities. The role of business entities in the perpetration of violence or inequalities or violations of rights goes back as far back as, for instance, during the transatlantic slave trade. So you can see through that period to colonialism clear patterns of business or corporate power unfolding in a way that was detrimental to human rights. So that's the reason why I think it's a very important matter to actually say a few words on the historical evolution of that reality, and also how it came to be something framed in a specific narrative, and also a reality that was actually um, taken into consideration in the legal discourse. So in Africa especially, but I think it's very important to mention, so this evolution from transnational slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, sorry, to colonialism. And you have a very important milestone, or at least turning point, in the discursive formulation of these issues during the Second World War. After the war, you might remember very well the trials of German industrialists, where the issue of business responsibility in atrocities came at the fore. So when it comes to Africa, we have specific emblematic examples. I mentioned already the transatlantic slave trade, but this is going very far back in history. I still believe it's very important to keep that in mind. And I think also it's important to dedicate more and more research to business roles, private actors' roles in the happening or the perpetration of this very sad period of our history. But more recently in our history in Africa, you have examples that are very well known, such as Shell in Nigeria, such as the blood diamond scandals in Sierra Leone, Angola, and other countries. You have apartheid in South Africa, and there is a very important role, critical role, that was played by business actors in the execution of apartheid policies. You have more generally and across Africa, here I'm just giving the example of DRC, which is emblematic, but you have as much as emblematic scandals in Africa as I would say the number of countries that we have. So almost in any African country, you do have a specific business and human rights issue related to the exploitation of natural resources. What are the impacts of these practices on rights. Um, and here, when I say rights, I think not only of individual rights, but also on um, uh, collective rights or group rights, especially in the African context. This is very important to keep in mind. So you can think of business impact on local ways of life. The fact that some business activities, corporate presence in some societies, think of mining communities, for instance, as come with the very high cost of completely dismantling the social fabrics in these contexts. Cultural and religious rights have been affected by business activities. Just think of some people in some groups on the continent, their relationship with the land and how, with forest, with land, and how they can use these resources for their cultural and religious um, their religious realities. So you have the disturbance of social relationship, gender asymmetries. Again, think of mining communities. For those who are familiar with these realities, I think these things are very clear. Children's rights in many of our countries, the way corporations have in their activities affected the right of children, and the African Committee on the Right and the Welfare of the Child has done a great deal of work on showing how corporate activities in a report that was published, I think, 2 years ago, how corporations and their activities can affect children. Other impacts are related to more like group rights, the question of the environment, the protection of the environment, although that is at the intersection of individual rights and group rights. Workers, working conditions, not paying proper wages or exploitation, not allowing workers to work in decent conditions. So labor rights in general have been also under attack through some of these corporate activities. Land and land grabbing. So this is a phenomenon, a scandal in many African countries where the distribution, or I would say the acquisition of land, has been made in a way that deprives communities, large communities, groups, and individuals from their right of exploiting their land. Corruption and illicit financial flows, this is also very linked to corporate activity, to business activities on the continent. And there is not 1 week, 1 month that goes without hearing about a very serious corruption scandal in which a big corporation or a business actor is involved. And this speaks to, all the human right violations that corruption actually can entail. So in terms of group rights, you can also think, and again, this is very important in our context in Africa, because as you know, the African Charter has a very important focus on group rights. You can think of rights such as the right of self-determination, which has been compromised in many cases due to very problematic relationship between corporate actor and sometimes state actors, or the role that a corporation plays in, for instance, preventing people from exercising their right or their sovereignty over their natural resources, the right to life, the right to liberty, prohibition of cruel and inhumane treatment, degrading treatment. All these rights are in reality affected freedom of expression by corporate activities. So when you think about it very deeply, there is no one single set of rights that is not uh, theoretically and actually practically affected in a way or another by business activities. So it's not only about individual rights, it's not only about political rights, it's not only about social and economic rights, it's also about, group rights. It's also about, uh, the right of a state and its population as a whole. It's also rights regarding the protection of the environment and the protection of the climate, for instance. So, as you can see, there is a broad range of human and people's rights that are affected by these corporate activities. Now, I want to turn very quickly to the evolution of the legal framework that deals with these business and human rights issues, the issues that we have briefly introduced, and the type of impact that business activities can have on rights. So I have to be a bit fast because we are very limited with the time today. But very briefly, the evolution of the normative framework is quite long. I will try to just summarize it in a few, I would say, important moment, or if I might use that expression, milestones. So first, the concept of corporate social responsibility in the domestic, which was actually born in a domestic context. And I will just touch upon the evolution at the international level, at the regional level, and also in some domestic levels. Very briefly, I don't need to go deeply into details. The concept of corporate social responsibility, as many of you might be very familiar with, is something that was born basically in the context of the US and the context of the evolution of the US economy, and especially in the middle of the last century, there was a number of concerns regarding the role that corporations play in terms of their impact on rights. And there is a whole field of research and thoughts that, was born and grew around the concept of corporate social responsibility. It had a very philanthropic type of acquaintance, making it some form of ethical tool, or some form of very soft normative tool, aiming at, at least stressing the role that business entities can play in the society through the exercise of some forms of responsibility. It's remained a very soft type of concept, very moral and ethical type of concept. And this, I would say, characteristic of the concept of corporate social responsibility has never disappeared, and throughout history it evolved into a much more type of normative tool, but it remained affected by that idea of, more ethical oriented than really a strong legal tool. At the international level, the evolution is also very long. I can just mention here a few important dates. In the middle of the 70s, for those who have have some familiarity with the evolution of the UN, there was a big moment of discussion around concepts such as, you know, concept that such as the protection of the domestic sovereignty, concept of the protection of states against interference from other states. But also that discussion was really one key aspect of that discussion was also the role of corporations in when it comes to interference in domestic affairs of states. So especially in the Latin American context, but also to a large extent in the African context, many corporations had played a certain role in actually influencing domestic politics. So that brought a number of discussion in the UN aiming at adopting, minimum form of legislation, looking at the role of these corporations and how to prevent them from actually interfering in domestic affairs. Most of these attempts were not very successful. They led to the adoption here and there of some sort of codes, but nothing very strong in legal terms. And that's also the period that coincides with the rise of neoliberal politics, which is a different form, I would say, capitalism taken at another level, with the idea that even the old or the previous form of capitalism was not open enough, and that the role of the state was still very important. Neoliberalism advocated for the idea that states should literally disappear, and regulation of business entities was something that wouldn't be welcome in such a form of thinking. And be it with Reagan and Thatcher in the UK, especially at the turn from the 70s to the 80s, these understanding of economy starting having a very important place, and they were comforted or enhanced by the fall of the Berlin Wall, giving the impression that there is only one way of thinking the economy, which is a way that will place private investment and private actors at the heart of any economic model, with less, as much as possible, less limitations on their actions. So that creates a quite difficult situation in which it was very difficult to actually provide for strong legal standards applicable to these entities. So one aspect of this important evolution that I also need to highlight here is the rise of sustainable development. This is also was a long and slow evolution that started somewhere in the UN at the international level in the 70s, with the adoption of a number of uh, instruments aiming at, persuading humans that their activity is causing issues with the environment. So declarations such as the Stockholm Declaration on the environment and sustainable development, uh, all the way to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, are part of this evolution, making the point that development is good, yes, but development cannot be done to the detriment of the environment. That is a very important stage or step in this evolution, because it's implied that although we can strive to develop our economies, to look for economic growth through bodies such as the World Trade Organization and others, it is still important to think, very important to think about the impact of these activities on the environment. This gives some sort of, I would say, good reason to consider that economic activities cannot be borderless. They cannot just be limitless. They cannot do what is supposed to be the key dimension of these private activities, which is to make profit. Profit should be limited by environmental concerns, by human rights concerns. as I have shown with all these attempts. But again, these attempts were um, very loud, but in terms of success, the outcomes they led to were in a way very limited. At the UN, for instance, the attempts of adopting some codes of conduct were faced with resistance, and in the 70s and the 80s, they simply failed. So, in the end of the 90s, with the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, there was, and many other civil society organizations and movements. I don't have time to go deeper into that. There was a renewal of this topic under what is called the Global Compact. Okay, I think Miracle, you are a bit late on the slides. So the Global Compact was adopted in the. I'm just jumping on some slides because I know that we are running a bit. We can run a bit late, so I'm just trying to go a little bit faster. The Global Compact was an initiative by the UN and many other stakeholders aiming at bringing back this issue. It led to the adoption of a sort of instrument, minimum document with a number of recommendations, I will call them like that, that were made to business entities in the way they have to conduct their businesses, so that it can be more compliant with some labor standards, human rights standards, environmental standards. After the Global Compact, there was a very important development in the UN because the UN Subcommission on Human Rights considered that there was a need to adopt a much stronger instrument, highlighting in a very clear manner the legal obligations upon business entities to respect human rights. That led to the adoption by that commission of the draft norms on the responsibility of transnational corporations and other business enterprises with regard to human rights. It was a strong document which, in strong language, highlighted and using the term of legal obligation as applicable to business entities when it comes to promoting, fulfilling, and respecting, ensuring respect for human rights. Then I jump very quickly to at the UN level, at least, what can be called the monumental development that was brought by the RIGI reports and the UN guiding principles on on business and human rights that was adopted in 2011. So RIGI was adopted a few years before that, and it did a work that was concluded by the adoption at the Human Rights Council of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights that many of you might be already familiar with. These guiding principles are organized or structured around three main pillars. The first one being business duty, the state duty to respect human rights, corporate uh, um, corporate responsibility to respect human rights, and the need for access to remedy. So the UN guiding principles have been a key, I would say, milestone in this international evolution, and they have left, I would say, a very important legacy, and they still constitute today one of the most consensual sources when it comes to discussing business and human rights issues. But they are not the only one, and sometimes we tend to forget that. There are many other instruments that can be, you know, brought to this conversation, and many of them are actually binding, legally binding instruments, unlike the UN guiding principles, whose legal status is quite a matter of debate and interpretation. But at least we have many other treaties, international documents, international texts that have much more, I would say, much a stronger value in terms of their normativity that are often not or overlooked in the discussion. I here want to mention, for instance, the labor standards that are quite very well entrenched in international instruments. You do also have some soft law frameworks that can be mobilized in this discussion, be it, for instance, at the OECD level, or even voluntary principles that are adopted by corporations or multi-stakeholder initiatives that exist in this field. So, in that sense, I think also in terms of regional development, there are many important sources that needs to be looked at when we think of these, the legal and the normative framework. So at the EU level, you probably know the development around the due diligence legislation in the EU, although actually that legislation is under a very serious attack, uh, if not even completely put into question. There are other specific regulations in Europe, and I think it's very important to mention that, because whenever there are legislations in these regions, because most of the companies that actually operate in our countries in Africa come from these regions, Europe, the US, Canada, and at least the North, it's important to look at these legislations there, in as much as they produce some form of extraterritorial type of effect. So in Africa, very important, and I will come back to that at the end. We have also very interesting development at the EU level, at the African Commission level, the African Court, and even sub-regional levels such as the ECOWAS and other frameworks. So in terms of domestic regulation, you also do have very important sources in domestic law that we tend also to forget when we think of business and human rights issues and the sources of obligations on business entities. In domestic laws of literally all our countries, you do have environmental codes, you do have criminal codes, you do have mining codes, forestry codes. These type of documents and many more can be the right place to look at when there are issues related to business activities and how they impact the environment, human rights, group rights in our countries. So I think this is very important also to keep in mind. And in the home countries of companies that intervene in our countries, that operate in our countries, there are also interesting development that happened over the years, especially over the last 10 years. You have a number of domestic legislation that were adopted in France, in the UK, in Germany, in other countries, and all these can be mobilized in a specific case when companies that are operating in our countries come from these countries. And I think today, for instance, many communities have been using the French due diligence law that was adopted in 2017 to actually bring cases against French companies operating in some African countries. I think this is very interesting also as a source of law to keep in mind. Now, the whole discussion around business and human rights issues have been quite, I would say, invaded with one key, I would say, legal or theoretical issue, which is how do you uh, find a foundation to these human rights obligations that are allegedly um, uh, imposed on business entities. So the debate is that can business entities ever or corporations ever be human rights obligation bearers, to put it simply. So the terms of that problem is that the concept of human rights has been, we know it very well, formulated in a very state-centric manner. So the idea was to regulate first and foremost the relationship between the state and its citizens. So in that sense, many an important talking point in that discussion was to say that business entities cannot be human rights bearers because they are not states, and states are the ones that have adopted these treaties, and they are the ones that are the addressees of these treaties. And in the same vein, the idea was that focusing too much on, and these things shouldn't be taken lightly, although they can be debunked easily, it shouldn't be taken lightly. So the idea was that if we focus too much on business entities' human rights obligation, we may create a situation in which there is some form of dilution, sorry, of the state's responsibility. You are going to dilute the state responsibility. The state is going to say, okay, now I'm not responsible because the business actors are perpetrating these violations. So, which is an interesting point. Also, the issue of legitimacy. Does it create a situation in which too much focus on corporations will give them too much legitimacy? It's very important to keep that in mind because that was something uh, Global South, can use that term, countries in the early discussions in the UN had put a lot of emphasis on saying that we don't want to give too much legitimacy to these corporations. You have to be careful. You don't have to put them too much at the forefront. So then there is also another issue, the issue of subjectivity. Many have said that these corporations, even multinational, are not international subject, and in that manner they cannot bear international obligations. So there was, however, a number, and there is a number of conceptual responses to these type of precautions or hesitations, or even putting into question of the fact that business entities can be human rights bearers. There are many concepts that were suggested and that are used in practice, uh, sometimes together, other times as a theoretical or a conceptual explanation of why business entities can and should actually be human rights bearers. So you have the fact that some people have considered that voluntary commitments can, in a sort of constructivist understanding of normativity, create obligations because you promise to do something. For instance, you are bound, sorry, by your own promises. Horizontal effect theory, that human rights are not necessarily a citizen-state relationship. It's also an horizontal relationship between citizens themselves, and they need to actually comply with these human rights obligations. Power responsibility theory, saying basically that once the whole concept of human rights, yes, is organized around the state, but the state is important not because it's the state, but because it has power. In that way, any entity that has power and that exercise that power over people can also be considered analogically as a state and responsible for human rights duties. So the duty right correlation. This is a very interesting one also, and I will give you an excerpt of the Union's Commission, the Commission, African Commission on Human and People's Rights, understanding of some of these issues seems to relate very much to this theory of right duty. You know that the African Charter has some duty clauses, Article 27 and 28, for instance, that creates duties for all citizens, not only rights, but also duties. Some have used these duty clauses to actually explain the sources, the conceptual sources of business obligations when it comes to human rights and the environment. Customary international law, general principles of international law or law have been also used in that sense. So, but in terms of normative framework, stepping away from the conceptual understanding of this, in terms of normative foundations, we do have, and I have said it already, a number of treaties that provide specific obligations on corporations. This is a fact, like direct obligations, or some would say in some instances, indirect obligations on corporations that coming from treaties directly. So also there is a very important development when it comes to prosecutions of corporations and when it comes to their relationship uh, with certain human rights violations that are characterizable as international crimes. You do have a number of interesting cases and also cases that are developing in many jurisdictions. You might have heard recently of the sentencing of a bank, a French bank, in relation to crimes that were committed in Sudan, and that happened in the US. It was BNP Paribas. So all these, the criminal dimension of this is very interesting, and there are interesting developments in many jurisdictions that can be good responses to corporate misbehavior. So there is domestic case law and international case law developing on these issues. And I cannot forget to mention here the Malabo Protocol in the African context that unfortunately has not yet come into force, but the the criminal dimension of corporate activity responsibility is very much highlighted in that instrument. So this is a summary here of the various sources that you can find. You will see here that there are sources that can be attributed, that can be categorized as soft law sources, but you do have also hard law sources. And the distinction between soft law and hard law is sometimes very porous. And for instance, in some situations, courts have been using code of conduct that were voluntarily adopted by a company against the company as a source of hard law. So you see here that something that was conceived initially as something soft for the company, which was a code of conduct, had become before a court something conceived and designed in a very hard way and imposing obligations, telling the company basically that you have said this and you didn't do, so it's an legal obligation and you are responsible for not respecting the thing that you have said. So these are simple legal techniques that are used in a very progressive way to interpret the existing, and I think that's a very important point. I will now try to land here by saying a few things on what needs to be done in Africa. So you know very well that in our African context, I mentioned that there have been very interesting development in the African human rights system, and sometimes when you look at the production of the African human rights system on business and human rights issues, I would tend to think that it's one of the most progressive that we can find in compared to any other region. So, and this is logical. It's related to our realities and the fact that we have been at the heart of these human rights abuses by corporate entities. So recently, I don't have time to go into the details, but recently in 2023, the Commission adopted a resolution calling for recommending a certain work on and calling for the preparation of an legally binding instrument that would be adopted ideally in the African context on business and human rights. So it's a very interesting development, which is based on the idea that in order to deal with the issues that we face on business and human rights questions in Africa, we need probably a treaty. So it's a way of approaching this issue, and I think it's quite an interesting way. We'll see how this process evolves. I have not been following exactly what is happening with this announcement at the Commission. But I think I have a few reservations about the need for such an instrument. First and foremost, because I don't think the stage at which we are now with the reshuffle of the international system and the shifting dynamics at the global level, this is the right moment or the ideal moment to adopt a treaty. But also, more fundamentally, my reservations lie in the fact that as lawyers or as postmoderns, we tend to believe that more law is a solution to everything. So when there is an issue, we think that it's important to adopt new laws. I don't believe too much in that way of seeing or approach, because I think sometimes it's very important to deal or to do with what is already there. And I think in terms of what is already there, there is a lot that can be used actually to advance the cause of business respects for human rights and the environment on the continent. And that was something acknowledged in a very, I would say, smart and stimulating manner by the African Commission itself, when in one of its reporting, its guidelines on state reporting in 2021, the Commission actually said something. I think it's important to read the entire quote here, excerpt. While states are the primary obligation bearers under the African Charter, it is also legally recognized that corporations, particularly multinational ones, have obligations towards rights holders. This obligation arises from the recognition that lack of such obligation may result in the creation of a human rights vacuum in which such entities operate without observing human rights. Under the African Charter, obligations of such entities towards rights holders have a clear legislative basis. Article 27 of the African Charter provides for the duty of individuals, and its sub-provision 2 lay down the obligation to exercise rights with due regard to the right of others. Clearly, if this obligation can be imposed on individuals, there is an even stronger moral and legal basis for attributing these obligations to corporations and companies. So here, there is a clear foundation, legal and normative foundation, that the Commission had provided when it comes to how to find a basis to these obligations for corporations. So I don't know what happened between 2021 and 2023 when the Commission started thinking that this was no longer a very good explanation to the issue of business obligations under the African human rights system. But in any case, I'm not against the adoption of a treaty. I'm just saying we probably have already an answer to the question of the foundation. Well, in that sense, and I will end here, I think it's very important to build on the existing. What is already existing there, the Commission has a number of jurisprudence, and here I mean cases, but also a lot of work that was done by bodies such as within the Commission, such as the extractive industry working group, the working group on indigenous communities, and many other cases individual like communications, like the Andoroes, the Ogiek, and starting uh, from previous cases that the Commission had to deal with when it comes to the uh, Ogoni people, for instance. So there is a great number of cases there that we can build on. The court has also echoed some of these development at the commission, you know, the Ogier case, certainly, and you have also a case that is more recent, brought against Cote d'Ivoire related to the to Trafigura and the Probo Kuala scandal in Ivory Coast in the middle of the 2000s. So I think the very important need here is actually to enhance domestic responses. The reality is that in our domestic jurisdictions, legal system, we do have already a lot of answers to the issues that we are faced with when it comes to corporate accountability or corporate legal responsibility, multinational corporations' presence and violations of specific rights in our countries. I think you look at our domestic legislation, already there is a number of answers there. Why are we not able still to achieve successful outcome with these domestic legislations, and we are still in need apparently of many more sort of law to deal with this issue? In my view, the issue is not about the law. Legal responses exist. That is my belief. I think the issue is how to, and that's a very political issue, how to deal with the main connivance between corporate actors and state leaders. So it's a political one. And I think it's on that front, in my view, that the struggle needs to be more articulated. How to make sure that our leaders do not plot with corporations in to our detriment, to put it very simply. And I want to end there with with a very interesting quote by this author, Nobel author that I invite you to read. The book exists in both French and English. Mbolo Boué, which is who is a Cameroonian novelist. She wrote that very beautiful book entitled "How Beautiful We Were," and I always give some of the excerpt from this book to my business and human rights law students. I think the book is very interesting. I invite all of you that love reading. I don't know if you are many because of how social media and TikToks have taken our life in custody, but I still believe there are few of us that love reading novels, and I will invite you to read that novel. And I think she really presents and describes very well that connivance that I was mentioning, that complicity of political leaders with corporate entities in our countries, and how that contribute to the havoc that we see in many of our communities. Um, and eventually, she thinks that this is something we need to deal with through our political commitments and engagement with our leaders in order to make things better for all of us. And that specific quote, she said, someday when you are old, you will see that the ones who come to kill us and the ones who will run to save us are the same, no matter the pretenses. They all arrive here believing they have the power to take from us or give to us whatever will satisfy their endless wants. So anyone who knows the Ogoni uh, trauma and the role of shell in Nigeria, reading this book, you will see many familiarities, many analogies with this situation. I would like to end here. I am very sorry. Yeah, I may stay for about maybe 5 minutes, but I have another commitment just in a few minutes. So I thank you again for listening to this. I thank you for your presence, and I thank the organizers for such an amazing event. Thank you very much, Miracle. You have the floor.
Hey, thank you so very much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Please, let's react with the emojis. Let's react with the emojis. We've had an enlightening session. I am Benjamin. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was quite impactful. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for that enlightening and compelling presentation. There are several points you've made. Several rich points to unpack. So I don't know if we can move to the fireside chat session just for 5 or 10 minutes, because I know you're almost out of time, sir. You said a lot of enlightening things. When you began with the emblematic examples in Africa, the apartheid regime in South Africa, and the role of businesses, we're paying rapt attention. By the way, happy birthday, sir. Please, let's use the emojis. Happy birthday, sir. Happy birthday, Prof. Happy birthday, happy birthday.
Thank
God
you,
bless
thank
you.
you very
God
much.
bless you. God bless you.
Thank you,
All
thank you.
right. So, you mentioned the apartheid regime in South Africa, the Shell, in Nigeria, the Delta State, then the Blood Diamond in Sierra Leone and in Angola. Then talked about the natural resources of DRC, and then the impact of all these things on human and people's rights, how it affects private local ways of life, how it affects cultural and religious rights, the social relationships that is affected, the gender asymmetries, children's rights, and what have you. Then the impact on human and people's rights, particularly, which is the essence of this presentation, the environmental pollution and climate change issues, the workers and work conditions, poor employment conditions, labor rights, the land law, land grabbing, all of that, corruption and illicit financial flows. There was a lot to take in. Then the impacts to, right to self-determination, the sovereignty, where you talked about, which is very important, people's permanent sovereignty over their natural resources, the right to life, right to liberty, all of these things, right to decent working conditions, to health and right to education, all of that. Then you talked about the normative framework, and then you said, talked about the origin of the domestic origin of the concept of CSR, that corporate social responsibility, the international evolution of the normative framework, and then the regional and sub-regional development, domestic regulation, and what have you. And then talked about the domestic origin, and then you mentioned the Theodore Krebs and the Richard Bowen, and what have you. And then you talked about the international evolution. It was a lot. It was a lot. Then the early attempts of the UN, the rise of the sustainable development, the global impact it's had, and then the 2003 UN norms and the transnational corporations, the guiding principles, and then business and human rights, then the proposed treaty. And then you said something very remarkable. You said your opinion, your position, perspective is not that it's not for us to keep adopting more legal frameworks or normative frameworks as you made, but then rather we should work with what we have. That's your one of the recommendations. We'll have this. We'll have a lot already. Is to improve them and make them Africa centered. Africa centered. Then you mentioned the African Commission, the Article 12. Which was Article 27 rather of the African Charter. Then the remarkable provisions. Now I have some few questions for you, sir. I don't know if you could take them right now. I just have three questions, while others are encouraged to type in the questions, and we could wrap up in 7 minutes or thereabout. Professor, sir, I checked some of your works. I looked them up yesterday. Then in your work on exploring responsible business conduct in conflict affected regions, especially the one, the alongside the Ezekiel Kiwani you highlight the risks the communities face when corporate activities intersect with fragility. Then in Africa's extractive hotspots, that's the question now. Please, what does genuine CSR require? And then are we talking about legal compliance? Is it enough, or must companies embrace a deeper people-centered responsibility? You mentioned something along that line while you were speaking, sir. I don't know if you could further unbundle, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your all of you for your birthday wishes. It's a pleasure to spend some part of my birthday with you, and I think we do have in Africa uh, next, I would say, generation of young scholars and researchers on these in these fields that are this young generation is very promising, and we are happy to have you so much interested in these issues and how to uh, deal decisively with them. So thank you for that, and for your question. I think the idea of I'm a bit reserved, and I have some hesitations with the whole concept of corporate social responsibility. I had to go very fast when I mentioned that in my presentation, but I did say that it's a concept that was mostly, I would say, framed in a very soft and light manner, very much ethical, somehow even philanthropical type of understanding of the role of business entities. You know, the idea was not to say clearly that they have legal obligations, but to say that they have some sort of moral, I would say, imperative to help the communities to avoid some sort of impact. So I think the whole discussion needs, and this is very much related to the fact that for years and for decades, the idea was that we need to always do everything to accommodate these actors because they are key to development, they are key to economic growth. As I said, although this might have some truth in it, the reality is that you cannot, I would say, take away the role of the state and the role of regulation. So there need to be a completely different approach to this, where we can sit and say that there are, okay, very important actors, these corporations, but they do have clearly legal obligations that cannot be, that their activities cannot be to the detriment of the collective. And I think in that sense, the African Charter and Article 2027, especially of the article, the Charter, or Article 28, it is quite telling. It's quite interesting. That article says precisely that every individual shall have a duty to respect and consider his fellow beings without discrimination, and to maintain relations aimed at promoting, safeguarding, and reinforcing mutual respect and tolerance. Okay, this might be very much focused on the idea of tolerance and non-discrimination, but the core idea behind is the duty that we all have to make the collective existence possible. Article 27, paragraph 2 says that the right and freedom of each individual shall be exercised with due regard to the right of others, collective security, morality, and common interest. So I think that there is a need for the redefinition of common interest in our societies. What is common interest, and how everyone, each actor, individuals and corporations can contribute to that. And in that sense, the idea that we should always try to accommodate specific actors because apparently without them the society will not exist is something that needs to be debanked and questioned, and rather we should start having a deep conversation on our social contracts in our societies, on our collective interest and common interest, and define them very clearly in a manner that can make everyone responsible for something and working towards the achievement of these common interests. So I will say there is a need to depart from that old understanding of corporate responsibility that is related to the concept of corporate social responsibility, and a new need to embrace a much more legal understanding and I would say obligatory type of narrative discourse around corporate responsibility.
All right. Wow, that was beautiful. An obligatory type of CSR, where it is much more, where it is not tokenistic gesture of just a giveaway or a give out, not philanthropic, but rather binding. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. That was impactful. All right, I have another question. Sir, the question is, you from your work, you've worked closely with the communities and advocacy networks, attempt to hold corporations accountable. Of course, it's obvious. Your work is everywhere. But from what you've seen, Prof, which accountability strategies produce real results? Is it through the courts? Because we just talked about accountability now. Is it through the courts, the media, or public pressure, or is it structured partnerships? Then, and what lessons should countries struggling in this area learn? We've mentioned in your work, you talked about DRC, talked about Nigeria, the Niger Delta, Ogoni. Then you talked about Ghana and gold mines of Ghana, what have you. So, sir, please, I don't know if you could shed more light on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a great question. I would say that you have to think of all these mechanisms together. I don't think there is one that should be having prevalence over others. I think it should be a sort of synchronic efforts to use and to mobilize all the available avenues in order to enhance corporate responsibility and in order to give some form of access to remedies to individuals and communities. And that can happen through formal, I would say, judicial or legal processes, but it can also happen in many other ways through, I don't know, political pressure, through negotiations, why not with companies, and we do see that on a daily basis, through discussion, through persuasion. It can happen through collective actions aiming at the domestic level at changing the laws, at imposing much more obligations, at making sure that the social contract that exists in these communities revolves around the idea of common interest, which cannot be in the interest of only one actor, which would be corporations. It should be something that is deeply entrenched in the consideration that a collective, for the collective to exist, for a community to strive, everyone has to play a specific role and to take some responsibilities. And in my view, all these mechanisms that you have mentioned should be put together or should be activated together. So in countries, in many of our countries, you see there are legal procedures that are made with more or less sometimes rate of success. You have also purely political actions that are sometimes taken. And I think you have to think of these as in a holistic type of approach where all avenues should be used and mobilized. I'm not too sure I hear you, but unfortunately, I would have loved to stay with you, but unfortunately, I have to leave now. I'm a bit late for my next meeting. It was a pleasure being with you. It was great. And again, thank you for the invitation and congratulations on what you are doing. And you can count on my contribution anytime you will need me. Thank you very much and have a great day ahead.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Have a great day
Thank you so
yourself.
much, Prof.
Happy birthday again.
Thank you.
Thank you
Happy
so much,
birthday.
Prof. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining in. As always, the turnout was great today. If you have more questions that we're not able to address in the course of the session, please send a message to us. We'll put it together in an email and we'll be able to share that with him and figure out another fireside session that we can have with him so he can answer those questions or he can respond by email. So reach out if you do have that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again. See
Thank you,
you next
Maya.
time. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And
Bye.
thank you, Benjamin. Thank you
All
so
right.
much for
Cool.
moderating that session. Thank you, Lasani, for
Yeah.
interpreting or translating. Thank you so much. And Shama. Bye, everyone. Okay, I can end
Bye.
the recording now.